When you first look at the world, it's easy to think everything is moving in small steps, incremental changes that don't seem urgent. But the truth is, what we're facing isn't small. It's not just another routine cycle. It's much bigger than what most people imagine. And the reason it feels so overwhelming is because these forces aren't moving in isolation. They're converging, feeding into each other, and accelerating the pace of change in ways that can catch almost anyone off guard. We're talking about shifts that go beyond normal ups and downs, economic cycles, geopolitical tensions, social fractures, technological disruptions. Each one of these alone is challenging. But when they all hit together, you don't get a linear outcome. You get compounding effects, multiplying risks, and amplifying uncertainty. That's the part most people miss. They assume tomorrow will look like yesterday, just with slight adjustments. But history shows us that once systems become too strained, they don't bend gradually, they snap, reset, and reorder themselves. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most people don't prepare until it's too late. Why? Because we're wired to focus on the immediate, on the familiar, on what feels safe to assume. It's easier to deny the size of the problem than to confront it. But if we don't look at reality as it is, not as we wish it to be, we risk being blindsided by changes that have been building beneath the surface for years. This isn't about fear mongering, it's about clarity. When you zoom out, you see the patterns. Great powers rise and fall, economies move through debt and deleveraging cycles, societies shift when the gap between expectations and reality grows too wide, and technology, it doesn't just innovate, it disrupts everything we thought was stable. The point here is simple. What's unfolding right now is much bigger than a temporary crisis. It's a restructuring, a transformation that will redefine how we work, invest, trade, and even trust the systems around us. Pretending it's business as usual is the fastest way to become unprepared for what's coming. When I step back and look at what's happening, I realize that it's way bigger than I thought at first. And that realization is uncomfortable because it forces me to accept truths that I would rather ignore. The natural human tendency is to think that the future will look a lot like the recent past, maybe with some small differences. That's how most people think about risk, about markets, about the world in general. But when I study history and compare it to what's unfolding now, I see that we are in a period where things are not just shifting, they're converging, accelerating, and compounding in ways that most people are not prepared for. Think about the nature of cycles. Economies move in cycles, empires rise and fall in cycles, markets swing in cycles. We've seen this for centuries, but every so often, the cycles overlap in a way that creates a much bigger impact. It's not one problem at a time, it's several at once, feeding into each other. Debt cycles meet political cycles, geopolitical shifts meet technological revolutions, and the combined force is much greater than the sum of its parts. That's what I mean when I say it's way bigger than I thought. It's the convergence that magnifies everything. Let's take the economy. Debt has been building for decades. Central banks have tried to manage it by lowering interest rates, by printing money, by creating more liquidity. That works for a while, but it doesn't erase the debt. It just pushes the problem forward. And when debt reaches levels where servicing it becomes difficult, societies start to fracture because the pie can't expand fast enough to satisfy everyone's expectations. That's when tensions rise between the haves and have-nots, between capital and labor, between different groups competing for a limited share. On its own, that would be a significant challenge. But combine that with geopolitical rivalry, where major powers are competing for influence and resources, and the strain on the global system intensifies dramatically. Now add in technology. Innovation doesn't move in a straight line. It tends to leap forward in bursts that completely alter the landscape. Artificial intelligence, automation, biotechnology, these are not incremental changes. They are disruptions that can replace entire industries and destabilize entire societies. That creates tremendous opportunity, yes, but also massive dislocation. People lose jobs faster than new ones can be created. The skills that once guaranteed security no longer hold value. And when large groups of people feel left behind by the pace of change, history shows us that anger and division quickly follow. What makes this so much bigger than I thought is not just that these shifts are happening, it's that they're happening all at once. You can't isolate one variable and say, if we just fix this, everything will stabilize. It doesn't work that way. Each force feeds the other. High debt leads to political polarization, which makes it harder to govern effectively, which weakens economies further, which then fuels resentment and distrust. Geopolitical conflict pushes nations to spend more on defense and less on growth, which worsens the debt problem, which creates inflationary pressures, which erodes trust in currencies. Technology accelerates all of this by changing the speed at which information spreads and by magnifying both the opportunities and the risks. The dangerous part is how invisible this feels in the moment. Most people continue living their lives as though nothing fundamental is changing. They see prices rising, markets swinging, political debates intensifying, but they don't connect the dots. They think these are isolated issues, not signs of a system-wide transformation. And because they don't see the magnitude of what's unfolding, they don't prepare. They assume tomorrow will look like yesterday, and by the time they realize the shift is real, it's already too late to adjust. That's why I keep reminding myself to study history, because while the exact circumstances are never identical, the patterns repeat. Every great empire in history has risen, peaked, and declined. Every major debt cycle has ended in restructuring or devaluation. Every period of technological revolution has created winners and losers, often dramatically reshaping societies. When I overlay those historical templates on what's happening now, the conclusion is inescapable. This is not a normal moment. It's not business as usual. It's a major turning point. And at turning points, clarity matters more than comfort. It's easy to deny reality, to convince yourself that things will work out on their own, to cling to optimism. But denial doesn't stop reality. In fact, it makes the eventual adjustment far more painful. The better approach is to accept reality as it is, even when it's harsh, and then adapt to it. That requires looking at the world as a system of cause and effect, recognizing how each force interacts with the others, and preparing for outcomes that most people are not even considering. Preparation doesn't mean predicting exact events. It's not about knowing the date of the next crisis or the exact path markets will take. It's about building resilience, diversifying, reducing vulnerabilities, staying adaptable. It's about not being overly dependent on any one system, any one market, any one assumption, because when the world restructures, the rules of the game change, and those who assume stability are the ones most at risk of being wiped out. I also realize that this isn't just an individual issue. Families, communities, nations, all will be tested by the changes underway. The societies that navigate these transitions best are the ones that can balance realism with adaptability, cooperation with strength, innovation with stability. Those that cling to the past, deny reality, or let divisions tear them apart tend to decline quickly. Again, history makes this clear. What's striking to me is how few people are willing to have this conversation honestly. It's easier to focus on short-term debates, to argue about temporary policies, to obsess over the daily news cycle. But all of that misses the deeper story. The deeper story is that we are in the midst of a massive restructuring, one that will affect how we live, how we invest, how we work, how we trust institutions. It will define the next generation. So when I say this is way bigger than I thought, I mean that the scale and speed of what's happening exceed the frameworks most of us grew up with. The comfort of gradual change, of predictable cycles, of manageable adjustments, that's fading. What's replacing it is volatility, uncertainty, and the potential for both great opportunity and great risk. The question is not whether change is coming. The question is whether we will see it clearly enough, early enough to prepare for it. And if there is one last warning to give, it's this: don't assume you have more time than you do. History doesn't wait for anyone. Systems don't bend forever. At some point, they break and reset. And when that reset comes, those who have faced reality and prepared will endure. Those who haven't will be left saying, this was way bigger than I thought. When I think about what happens in times like these, the second thing that strikes me is how easily people forget the mechanics of cause and effect. We like to believe events come as surprises, sudden shocks that appear out of nowhere. But in truth, almost everything we call a surprise has been building for years beneath the surface. The signs were always there, but they were ignored because acknowledging them was uncomfortable. And that's the mistake that repeats again and again. People confuse what they wish to be true with what is actually happening. If you study any period of great transition, whether economic, social, or political, you'll see a common thread. The majority didn't see it coming, not because the information wasn't available, but because it was easier not to see. That's what concerns me most right now. We're living in a time where the evidence of imbalance, of fragility is overwhelming, yet the prevailing mood is still complacency. Markets are volatile, debt is unsustainable, political divisions are widening, technology is racing ahead, and geopolitical rivalries are intensifying. Taken individually, each of these challenges is serious. Taken together, they form a perfect storm. But because people live in the day to day, because they're distracted by noise, they don't see the storm until it's already breaking over them. This is the second key point. Don't be fooled into thinking crises erupt overnight. They are the result of long compounding pressures finally reaching a breaking point. It's like watching ice crack on a frozen lake. For a long time, it looks stable. You can even walk across it and convince yourself it's strong. But beneath the surface, pressure is building, and when it finally gives way, it happens suddenly and decisively. The moment of collapse feels like a surprise, but the weakness was there all along. That's exactly how societies, economies, and empires function. They don't crumble out of nowhere. They slowly erode, stress accumulates, and then one trigger event makes the entire structure snap. In the 1930s, it was a financial crash that exposed underlying fragility. In the 1970s, it was stagflation and geopolitical conflict that revealed systemic weaknesses. Today, we have a combination of both: financial excess, political polarization, and international rivalry, all layered with the accelerating force of technological disruption. It's not one problem, it's the convergence of many, each feeding the other. The danger is that most people look at problems in isolation. They ask, will the market crash? Or will inflation rise? Or will there be conflict? They treat these as separate questions. But the truth is, they are deeply interconnected. A strained financial system makes a nation weaker geopolitically. Political polarization makes it harder to address economic imbalances. Technological disruption widens the wealth gap, which fuels social unrest. Each one doesn't just exist alongside the others, it amplifies the others. That's why the impact is so much greater than anyone expects. And when people don't see that, they prepare in the wrong way, or worse, they don't prepare at all. They save in assets that will lose value. They trust in systems that are already cracking. They assume institutions will hold when history shows that institutions often fail under pressure. That's not cynicism, it's reality. Every empire that has ever collapsed had leaders, citizens, and investors who believed this time is different. They thought their system was too advanced, too strong, too permanent to fail. But permanence is an illusion. Systems endure only as long as they adapt, and when they stop adapting, they break. I can't overstate how dangerous complacency is in times like these. Complacency blinds you to risks that are obvious in hindsight. Complacency makes you believe stability will continue, even when instability is already unfolding. It lulls you into thinking you have more time to prepare than you do, and then when the breaking point arrives, It feels like an ambush, even though it was predictable all along. That's why awareness is not optional, it's essential. You have to train yourself to step back, to zoom out, to see patterns beyond the daily noise. You have to study not just what's happening now, but what has happened throughout history, because human behavior doesn't change nearly as much as we like to think. The faces change, the technologies evolve, but the cycles of debt, power, greed, fear, and conflict repeat with striking regularity. Once you understand those patterns, the so-called surprises of history stop being surprising. This is not about predicting the exact future. Nobody can do that. It's about recognizing probabilities, preparing for ranges of outcomes, and avoiding the illusion of certainty. If history teaches anything, it's that certainty is the most dangerous illusion of all. When everyone is certain that growth will continue, bubbles form. When everyone is certain that peace will hold, conflicts erupt. When everyone is certain that currencies will hold value, devaluations happen. Certainty blinds us, humility prepares us. And so the real challenge is psychological. It's not just about knowing the facts, it's about overcoming the bias to ignore uncomfortable truths. People naturally resist thinking about decline, about disruption, about fragility. It's unpleasant, it creates anxiety, but discomfort is not a reason to turn away. It's a signal to pay closer attention. When something feels too big, too overwhelming, that's often the very thing you need to confront head on. Because the alternative, pretending it isn't real, doesn't make it go away. It only makes the eventual adjustment more brutal. In times like these, strength doesn't come from optimism or denial. It comes from realism. Realism means acknowledging risks as they are, not as you want them to be. It means preparing for shocks before they arrive. It means diversifying your risks, building resilience, and accepting that what worked in the past may not work in the future. Most of all, it means resisting the comfort of the crowd. The crowd will always tell you that things are fine until the very moment they're not. And history punishes those who follow the crowd more harshly than those who think independently. The coming years will test whether we've learned these lessons or whether we'll repeat the same mistakes. Will we recognize that pressures have been building for decades, or will we pretend the breaking point came out of nowhere? Will we prepare with humility, or will we cling to certainty until it collapses under us? These are the questions that matter, not the daily ups and downs, not the short-term noise, but the long-term recognition of how fragile systems can be and how suddenly they can shift. So when I say this is way bigger than I thought, the second realization is that the crisis we fear in the future is not really in the future, it's already here, building quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when pressure exceeds capacity. The cracks are spreading even if we refuse to look, and when the final snap comes, it won't be a surprise. It will simply be the inevitable consequence of years of ignoring what was in plain sight.